is invested in our personality and our identity building efforts and our brand building efforts. So we don't really want to say, what do you mean? Because then we sound naive or perhaps even stupid, and we don't want to sound that way. So we sort of tend to forge ahead by sometimes buttressing what we said and providing even more evidence of what we think is perhaps more of the same passion that started the discussion. And that only adds fuel to the fire because the other person feels ignored. And it's a classic case of perhaps, two ships missing each other in the night, which is how most miscommunication happens. And really, there's only one solution, or there are two. And I can only sort of share my own personal strategies here because, like everybody else, sometimes I'm really pressed for time. I see a comment to perhaps a thread I put in a lot of thought and effort and time in, and a comment jars. And my immediate reaction, my initial response is to say, what the heck? Why can't you just read? Why can't you just understand what I said? Because I actually went to a lot of trouble to put it there. And what I've found is that every time I say that or react that way, I've always misjudged the other person at the other end, and I've caused more harm than good, and perhaps hurt the feelings of somebody who, in all naivety, was being fairly open and thought, their comment was pretty straightforward. So what I do is, if I find myself getting worked up about a comment, I just walk away, cool down, and come back, half an hour later, and the heat is gone. Then I can say, maybe I need to explain this a little bit better. And it doesn't matter if I repeat myself, or it doesn't matter if I have to do a little bit more legwork. It's always worth it because somebody is actually, willing to engage, and they've gone to the trouble of doing that, and I have to respect that. And every time I apply that strategy, things have gone swimmingly well. I've actually found a lot of people to connect with through that way, whom I wouldn't have connected with, I must say. So it actually pays off in terms of understanding who the people are. There are a lot of dangers.
I've had that same experience where it seems to start to go, off in this direction, and I'll pull back and think about what they said, because I really agree with you. It starts with you. It does start with you when you're having a conversation, and that listening and really thinking about what the other person is saying is so important to furthering that real communication. And so what might have started off as something that kind of, got me going, what are they saying? And then rethinking that, and then really taking a look at it, and just putting out my response in an honest way, or even asking the question, even saying, am I understanding you correctly? And rephrasing what they said has diffused a lot of sparks.
Well, yeah, it's that making that connection, isn't it? That very human connection, and it is very easy sometimes not to do that. But that's because of our own perceptions or misconceptions in that initial stage of getting to know somebody or getting to understand what they said. Because we've seen, again, speaking from my own personal experience, I've seen the flip side of this, where somebody whom I do know says something which is almost cryptic in what it says and can be sort of translated or interpreted any number of ways. And that doesn't produce any reaction at all, because I know the person, I know their mindset, I know the context of their comment, I know where they're trying to be flippant and where they're trying to add something else, or where they're trying to point to some other direction. So I don't actually misinterpret that. And I think that's the key, knowing that other person. And it's very difficult to know in a social media stage everybody who happens to interact and engage with you. And the more visible you are, the more people you get who are there. So you have to.
That's true. And there's also that point when, as more people come into your social media circle, if you will, that meeting new people and having conversations with them, you those little sticking points may come up at the beginning because you're still sounding yourselves out. I mean, it's just like, meeting a person in real life, and you realize there's a connection, and you start a conversation, and then it feels like it's going weird, and at least with social media, I have to bring this up. This is from Lee Rickler. We get to pause. So Lee says, write your venomous reply, save it, come back to it tomorrow, and read it back. See if you'd be proud of sending it now.
It's absolutely right. And again, that's how I develop my strategy of, if I feel I got riled about something, I just walk away and give it 20 minutes. And when I come back, I'm not. I've got a clearer head. So, and the thing is that usually things which rile you are very rarely caused by the thing of the moment. It's very rarely that's the actual comment that's done that. There's always something that's happened beforehand. You were tired, you were stressed, too many things happening, you thought something else, you perhaps just come out of another thread where you gave, 1,000-word reply to somebody, and you get into another thread and somebody says, oh, how about that? And you think, I've just spent 1,000 words doing it in that thread, but that person doesn't know that. You know that. And it's you who gets riled up because you've done it. But you don't, we're very emotional most of the time, so you don't actually have the luxury of reason to say, wait a minute, I spent 1,000, perhaps I can point him to that. He doesn't know this. But, instead you say, what, are you some kind of stupid idiot? Can't you just see it? And, that's how it flares up, right?
Find my meaning.
Yes, usually, all in caps, all in caps.
Yeah, and then Rick has another follow-up to what you said, David. He says, when we buttress our own position, we are also digging trenches and getting ready for war. The other person sees it that way and brings on the bigger guns. I agree with you there, David Amerland.
Viv is absolutely right, and he's no stranger to social media. And he's absolutely, here's the thing, and we're setting aside, we need to stop and understand the process. The moment somebody says something which then makes me go off and do my research and come back with 1,000 links and little things pointing to everything, I'm invested now, reputationally, in that comment. And what I've put there is not really a reply, it's a counterattack to shut them up and tell them, read all this. So whatever they say next is never going to be good enough, really, unless they say, I agree with you. And that sort of seems to negate the whole point of the conversation. So I think, these processes where we get defensive, we circle the wagons, we put up our first line of defense, and everything else is a counterattack, which we have to defend again, that is not really a conversation. And I think we are learning new literacies in the social media age, in terms of communicating, in terms of actually getting past our own short-term heuristics, which are there to help us biologically live in a world which lived in the past, and we had to react very quickly to attack a counterattack. And we need to realize that we have now the luxury of time to actually think, and we should think always. And this is something which we have to force ourselves to do because it doesn't come easily and it doesn't come naturally sometimes. And we all struggle with it. I'm no exception, which is why I have this rule that if I get really riled up about something, I just walk away and think about it, and I think, what was it really? And 9 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with that particular situation. And the few times when it does, it's total misinterpretation from my part, because I bring in my own stresses and misconceptions, and the moment, if you have a black day, everybody seems to be sort of glaring at you instead of looking. And that's you. They're not, they're not really glaring. So yeah, that's how I find it works best for me.
I really agree with you about the luxury of the time that we have in social media. That it's a luxury, and I think that's why we're used to in face-to-face it's right now. But in social media, we do have that luxury of time where we do get to, get up, walk away from the desk, do 10 push-ups, whatever it is, and come back with a clearer head, and re-look at what that other person said and re-look at what your real, say, intellectual responses are as to your, fired off first emotional response. So I really thank you for bringing up that luxury. I think we all need to indulge in that luxury. And then Jessica Maynard. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for being here. Um, has has a statement. She says, I have actually had a fan on Facebook address something that kind of irked me before I did, and that was nice. But that started with creating a community, and when someone posted something that was completely off our beliefs, she just said, "Hey, we're supportive here." I couldn't have said it better.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, that just goes to show, the kind of communication environment we actually live in now, and there's a lot of things to take into account. Um, and having, if we go into the very preconceived ideas, I think we're only setting ourselves up to fail, essentially, because the people we are communicating with most of the time don't even come from our own cultural mindset. So the gaps in the connection are even bigger than they are in a sort of normal context. And unless we're prepared to work to bridge those gaps, they're not going to be bridged automatically, and the conversation within inverted commas which we're having is only going to end up in what a lot of the times we call trolling, and it's not. Trolling, I mean, I'm very glad you mentioned trolls at the beginning, because there's a very hard definition to trolling, and it's not people who don't agree with you. It's not even sometimes people who let things get out of hand and they become a little bit abusive because they're so passionate and things just escape from them. Those people usually we can actually connect with and say, hey, hey, let's actually talk about this. Trolls are people who are there to get a reaction simply by being purely negative. So whatever you say, it's going to say the opposite. And it doesn't matter to them what you say. It doesn't matter to them what your position is. It doesn't matter to them whether you meet them halfway or not, because they're not interested in any of that. They're interested in the friction. And those people really, they have a particular mindset which is sometimes hard to understand. And in many ways, you have to feel sorry for them because they isolate themselves from that conversation.
Oh, I just so totally agree, and I like your full-on definition about trolls because um, their aim is friction, and we there's plenty of friction in our lives. We don't need added independent friction creators.
That's
There's
right. Life is hard enough. That's right.
really. Glenn Jewett has a comment here. Before the reaction sets in, I try to reread and be sure that I have truly understood the comment. If there's any doubt, I chalk it up to misinterpretation.
Glenn is absolutely right, and that's what we should all be doing. And the thing is, we know that. This is like, it's like, cigarettes are bad for us, and too much salt is not good, and we know what we do, right? A lot of people still smoke, and a lot of people have a lot of salt on their food. So we know what's the way we should react. The thing is, unless we actually have a coping strategy, we're going to fall into that trap, because it's fine here in this environment where we're all calmly discussing something we pretty much agree on, to discuss it and agree on it, because it's the environment. But you take us out of this into a different kind of context, and then that's when things usually go wrong. So unless we're actually prepared, if we have that strategy ready to play in our minds, what we will get if we don't have it is a knee-jerk reaction with with probably the emphasis on the last three letters of that word, last four letters. So it's that kind of thing that we need to be prepared for, and this is part of our social media literacies. This is the way we sort of should be prepared to move forward and connect with the people we actually talk to.
Right, because connection is what our social media presence is about. You know, we're making those connections. We are building our, you know, our community, as it were, of people that we know and engage in, and we learn to listen. We learn to listen. And then Karen Chin has a comment. She says, "Step back, be gracious, never write anything down that you would have to explain your actions to your mother later."
that, that is so true. Well, it's really funny because way back when I was giving a talk on in social media and how you should conduct yourself, and this is back in 2011, I said, you know, basically social media is like having a conversation in your grandma's living room. Anything which you wouldn't say there, you shouldn't actually say in a social media stage. Um, we are growing up. We're becoming a little bit more mature. So perhaps, you know, we feel a little bit freer in that regard. But what Karen said also goes in that, you know, we're putting out there sentiment that is judged by its intent, not just its content. And, you know, I've come across people who are fairly perhaps too sarcastic or sometimes occasionally abusive in what they say, but they feel very passionately about what they say. And they calm down eventually and we have a fantastic conversation. So I've developed a thick skin to the initial reaction until I'm convinced that the person has something of value to say, which means I tend to judge people by the content now rather than just the wrapper of that initial contact. But it does take effort and it takes a knowing risk, if you like. And again, both of these are part of the social medium spectrum. You know, it doesn't come easily, it doesn't come naturally, although we want desperately, all of us, to connect. We must remember the different mindsets we actually encounter, the different experiences behind those mindsets. We really have no way of knowing what shaped that person who made that comment. We don't know what buttons perhaps our content pushed to them. So we need to be able to take that into account, that not knowing, and actually cut them some slack. And then, you know, progress that initial contact to a conversation and judge it from the content that you get from there instead of just that initial thing. But it is, again, it shows how difficult it is to do right. And again, calmly we can discuss it here. But you know, on an average day when a million things are happening, and you know you have stuff to do in the real world, and you have deadlines approaching, and projects which need to be managed, and phones are ringing, and your dog is barking because he wants you to take him for a walk, for instance, then you know things become a little bit too much, and then we overreact. And again, that shows our humanity. And perhaps there's the lesson to be learned, that ultimately we're all fallible and we're all human, and we need to all cut each other some slack in that kind of context until we can actually understand what's happening.
I'm silent because I'm agreeing and thinking all at the same time. The we're in this social world, and most of us here love this social world and are embracing it. And at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, we're all learning how to be here. I know when I got up this morning and I was thinking about, I love that comment about, you know, have your mom read it, because I was thinking about, you know, common courtesy. How much does common courtesy come into play when we find ourselves in those situations where we don't quite understand what the other person is saying, or it is pushing our big red button, that we need to step back and, you know, as you mentioned, David, it starts with us, and take a look at ourselves and look at where our responses are coming from.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that was a very 60 statement, but
no, not at all. I think it's very topical, and in many ways, you know, the history of the past hasn't been lost. We're learning all the time on the basis of it. Not too long ago, a couple of months ago, I did an article where I said I no longer listen to the tone argument. And essentially the tone argument is that, somebody reacts to something which you said, but your reaction is not to what they said, it's the way they said it. And, perhaps the expectation for everybody to be ultimately courteous and very polite is a little bit too much at times, because again, we don't know all the experiences that the other person has had. All we do know, evidentially, is that that person in that particular point in time has decided to connect with you and actually try and communicate. And, again, always on the proviso that it's not a troll, in which case it's not really a communication. We owe it to ourselves to try and understand what is it that ticked them off, what is it exactly that they are saying, and how are they saying it. And we look again at the content of their reply, of their comment, rather than just what they said, and we try to contextualize it. And I admit it's not easy, especially, and again, here I'm going to make distinctions, because I think if you're a woman, sometimes it is harder, because there are a lot of issues and sometimes sensitivities which can impact upon that. But ultimately, we all have to sort of make some choices and try and deal with that. So.
And then Dave Pipe says, I've developed a thicker skin with the number of music posts I put out in public. I normally sit back and ponder a while before making a comment back to anything snide.
Yes, and I mean, here's a classic example, because you can make you can actually create a post that is very knowledgeable about music and put it out there, and people will react not to the knowledge but to the emotional content and context of that music in relation to them and their experiences. And that's sort of it's a classic example of miscommunication, because whatever they say hasn't always been a response to what you wrote. It's in the response to the piece of music you referenced or said or posted, and that's how they take it depending on their own cultural experience of it. So it does take a little bit of an effort to actually make that connection. I must say that ultimately, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, music brings out very strong emotional responses. But I've seen Dave in action on some of his posts, and he really uses discernment to distinguish between, the people who are responding emotionally to the music and the trolls who are there to just cause trouble. And I've seen the trolls go away on some of, he just, makes them go away on the posts, and the other posts are still there. So, and I think part of that is Dave puts out a lot of content, and so he has a lot of experience with dealing with the emotional responses that people get to music on a regular basis.
Well,
and I like his wise saying, sit back and ponder.
Well, yes, indeed. And again, it comes down to that luxury of space which we need to give ourselves before we actually respond, unless we're really confident that we have understood the content and the context, and then there's no real case of miscommunication. But in that case, we wouldn't probably be feeling very strongly about it ourselves. So every time we react, there's a reason for it. We need to understand it first.
Yes, and then here's a comment. I'm going to bring this up because Adam is new to Google+. Adam Furlong. What do we do to a troublemaker's comments where they are aimed at making us mad? If it's all just insults, do we report them and block them? And we addressed this really quickly, Adam, at the beginning, but I wanted to bring it up because for people who are new to Google+, it can be extraordinarily bewildering.
Yep. Okay. I mean, there are several different ways of actually dealing with this, Adam. And the first one is to actually understand the context of their communication. If all they want to do is make you mad, usually if you ignore them, they go away because they want a reaction. But if they just persist and they become troublesome, then you can just report them and block them, and that's it. And if you block somebody, this is what happens. They can no longer see your content. You can still see theirs unless they block you back. So really, what you've done is you remove the value of your own engagement and work in a social media stage from their stream. So they're the poorer for it. At the end of the day, what enriches us really is that connection, the ability to see other people's posts, to share with them their ideas and their opinions and their passions and their comments. And if you remove that from them, essentially you're removing your presence from their sphere. And if we all do that, because this is the ultimate result of that kind of conduct, they end up being in a box. And you can yell as much as you like in a box, so it doesn't really matter. And that's the whole point of this. The other thing, of course, is to try and, depending on how the conversation goes, and you have to be the judge of that, is to try and actually connect with a person, understand the context of their interaction. If there's something which made them mad because they misunderstood or misconstrued or misinterpreted what you said or what you wrote, then perhaps there's room for engagement and conversation. But it always comes down to a case-by-case basis.
Yes, all right. That was a wonderful full explanation. And then Omisido has a question for you, David. He says, a study found that anger is the fastest spreading emotion on social media. Why? Why is anger prevailing
Okay,
over joy?
that's great. Yes, it is, but also there are countless studies which show that on the social media plane, we tend to be nicer generally. And the reason we tend to be nicer is because we have that ability to disconnect if things get too hard, and we all feel a little bit safer because at the end of the day, you're at home, you're not in a public place. So, you can afford to be a little bit nicer. But now we ask, why is anger easier to spread than joy? Well, for many reasons. One of the obvious ones is that we're all frustrated all the time at many different things. And essentially, anger is like the broken window syndrome. It gives us the permission to be angry. And it doesn't matter what you're angry about. You just leap on a bandwagon and just let everything externalize. And that's an easy thing because it feels good. You feel it's a catharsis in many ways. You get it out of your system, it's out there, and you've got somebody to blame, because whenever somebody's angry, there's always somebody to blame. So things are very black and white and very polarized. And again, in a simplistic mindset, sometimes we'd crave that kind of simplicity and that kind of clarity. We just don't have it. We don't want to think all the time. We don't want to have all the time to judge and try and see which area of gray are we in now. So we want, good and bad. We are good and you're bad, and it's usually us good, you bad kind of thing. So that's why anger is so easy to spread. But I think also, the moment we realize that, we all suddenly become responsible. So if you feel really angry about something, and you're really angry about something and you want to get it out there, by all means do so. But back it up with facts. Explain why you're angry. Don't just say I'm angry because, them and us. It's not that easy anymore. Explain all this and then give everybody the opportunity to actually intellectually assess your anger. And if they resonates with their own and they leap on it, then you also found alliances and friends who may actually get somewhere, because anger points which match other anger points probably are valid and something we should be addressing. And instead of simply emptying ourselves out there, feeling better for having done that and having achieved nothing.
It's a really important point. So look how we resonated last week, David, when you mentioned stoning.
Oh yeah, that was Spanish newspapers. Yes.
And then we're coming to the end of our time, so I'm going to bring up one more post. This is from Sally Sue Ember. And she's replying actually to Buek, but she says, if it's a personal attack, I ignore it and block. If it's oppressive or unjust to a group, I speak up, regardless of the effects on the troll, because I am an ally for oppressed groups, whether or not I belong to the group being maligned.
Okay, I mean, Sally makes a very important point here, and I think, personally, we have the leeway to sometimes just ignore things, let them go, and just get out of the conversation. And that's our own personal choice. The moment we witness an attack on another person or another group, then it becomes an issue of justice, perhaps, and there we really are obligated to have some kind of opinion. It's a public arena we're on. We should not turn a blind eye to things like that. And this is part of our perhaps social media obligation in terms of these things. How we address it, of course, is key. We shouldn't sort of get another mob together and try and fight fire with fire, because that leads to nothing. But if it's a real troll, then that is a wasted effort, because trolls don't care about the position. They don't care about the logic behind it. All they care about is the friction in the interaction. So, however you position that, whatever logic you bring into this, you're not going to get anywhere. Trolls are easier just segregated into a box and thrown into their own little enclave, if you like. So again, this is a judicious kind of judgment that you have to make. And you're right, it's exercising our own personal responsibility for creating the social media environment we want to inhabit. And for that, we are all responsible. And thank you for bringing it up.
That was just a really wonderful point about the social part of being on social media. That was a very great point, Sally. David, I really want to thank you so much for entering into this discussion and for walking us through going from our gut emotions in conversation to stepping back and giving it time to percolate up, I guess, to our intellectual abilities so that we can come back. It's really hard to do. And
Yes.
I think the more that we as people who are very involved in social media want to progress and want to build the strength of the community, we need to practice our skills in that regard, because just getting into verbal fisticuffs doesn't really improve our communication or our community. So anyway, David, do you have anything on board that you'd like to share with us other than giving reports to everyone before Christmas?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of books. Both will come out at the beginning of next year. But one of them actually addresses some of the issues which we discussed today, and it does so in a narrative structure. So I'll be posting more as soon as I can, because at the moment contractually I can't say too much. So just I'll keep you posted.
Oh, great! I'm really excited to hear that. That's wonderful. We all need to think about how we behave, for lack of a better word, how we behave and how we can implement our core values within the social community. So, David, thank you so much. Thank you, Zapster audience, for all your points and your questions. This has been a really interesting discussion. David, I can't thank you enough for being willing to discuss, things, the negative parts of things that people sometimes don't want to think about, or they push under the table, or it's, my way is the highway sort of thing, and they don't want to talk about it. So I really, really appreciate your being here today and helping us all think about how we can become more skilled at communicating on the social network everywhere.
You're very welcome, and thank you for asking me.
Thanks a lot. We didn't know when you were scheduled. We had no idea what the topic was going to be, so I really appreciate your doing this. All right, thank you, and thank you, everyone. And also, this is the last midweek Zap for the year. I should just let everyone know. And so I'll see you all in January. We start on January 7th, and Wiwek is going to be with us. So I'll see you then. Have a wonderful holiday time. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Ciao.